This is a recording for the Unseen Poetry section for Coat and the Armada. It follows up a separate video where Coat is analysed and written up as a single poem analysis. The notes for it look a little bit like that, so hopefully you've seen and had access to that one, where we've gone through the story of Coat and what it's about in terms of parent-child relationships. Okay, so the poem that we're going to look at now that links to that is called The Armada, so you should have a copy of that one. So just like with any other poem, you want to be writing down your who, your what, whoops, make sure I do my W properly, your when, and your where, and save your why until afterwards. Okay, so if we just go through that, the Armada, by the way, if you don't know what an Armada is a group of ships, which will become relevant in a minute. Even though both of these poems are about parents and children, as it would tell you in the question, this group of ships will become relevant. So it says, long, long ago. So that's going to kind of help you with the when straight away. So if we just highlight that, that's going to help you with the when. So it's in the past. You know, we don't exactly know how far in the past, but you can put a long time ago if you like. I should really do that in black so it stands out as well. So it's the past. And it says, when everything I was told was believable, and the little I knew was less limited than now. So this idea of this poem is, is probably going back quite a long time to when they were quite young. So we've got a bit of a retrospective going on here. It says, I stretched belly down on the grass beside a pond, and to the far bank launched a child's armada. Okay, so he's put some ships on a pond. Now, we can start figuring out a little bit more here. So your pond is going to be your where. Well, it's going to be, done it again. It's going to be part of your where. And we've also got the who. So we have a child. Now we know it's going to be about parent and child relationships because it says that in the question. But you've at least now got the evidence to actually, prove that. And that gives you the perspective. This is from the perspective of the child and not from the perspective of the parent, because you've got that word I that's, helping you to prove that. And that child's armada is a broken fortress of twigs, the paper tissue sails of galleons, the waterlogged branches of submarines, and they all came to ruin and were on flame in that dusk-red pond. So this child has built some ships or some boats and pushed them out onto the water. Okay, so you can just put that there. They built some ships. And what's happened to them when they go on the water? They get destroyed. So they've made a boat out of paper tissue sails and twigs, so out of small bits of wood and paper tissue, both of which are going to be flammable. And when it's been pushed out onto the water, it's been on flame in that dusk-red pond. Now, some people may argue that's slightly metaphorical, but you can actually do that. You can actually sort of make it like a sort of Viking funeral for those boats as they're pushed out. And you, mother, stood behind me. Right, so we have the mother cropping up now. Okay, so you have a child and their mother. So I know it said parent-child relationships, but we know it's not a father, it's the mother. Stood behind me, impatient to be going. So the mother doesn't want to be there, but the child's having fun, making these ships and pushing them out across the pond. And the mother is old at 23. Well, you're not technically old at 23. So maybe that mother has grown old a little bit early. Maybe that mother sort of acts older than they are. But just something interesting to bear in mind there. I'm just going to scroll down. And it says, alone, thin overcoat flapping. Okay, so she's alone. So maybe a hint there towards the, towards the husband or the father figure, perhaps missing. I'm just going to put that on there because it's not really a who. It's more like an absence of a who. And then it says, how closely the past shadows us. So the past shadowing us now. So we've got a different time frame now. So we also have a present time frame. In a hospital, a mile or so from that pond, right? So we've got another where. So, pond. And then in the present, we have the hospital. I'll just cross that out. So we have that hospital there. In a mile or so from that pond, I kneel beside your bed. Okay, so whose bed are we talking about? Probably the mother's, and we're in this hospital. And closing my eyes, reach out across 40 years to touch once more. So the present is plus 40 years from the past. So if they were a child in the past, they're going to be heading towards 50 or over 50 now. And it reaches out across 40 years to touch once more that pond's cool cool surface, and it is your cool skin I'm touching. So we're looking back at the past and metaphorically touching that water by touching his mother's skin. And if you look at that phrase, when's the only time when someone has cool skin? Well, when they're dead, because your skin is warm. We are warm-blooded mammals. We are warm-blooded creatures. Okay, so the cool skin proves that this person has died. And it says at the bottom, for as on a pond a child's paper boat was blown out of reach by the smallest gust of wind, so too have you been blown out of reach by the smallest whisper of death. And so even if you weren't quite sure, that does prove it, that this person has died here. Okay? And a childhood memory is sharpened, and the heart burns as the Armada burnt. Okay? So obviously your heart can't literally burn, but metaphorically it can burn with pain, just like those boats burn, which is why I think they were actually burned long, long ago. Okay? And you'll notice that long, long ago is the same as the intro as well. So it's about the past. It's about time. Okay? Now obviously the mother has died. So part of the what is going to be grief and loss. Okay? And you can call it death as well if you want to. Now, this relationship is obviously close. It's a parent, it's a child. They're going to have that bond. So you might want to even include things like the parent-child bond in that. All right? So that's your outline of this who, what, when, where. Now, you'll come to the why a little bit afterwards, but you may even start to have ideas on it. You might want to pause the video now, maybe have a guess at what you think the why is with your teacher. And obviously you want to be picking through your quotations now as well. So this would be a good point to go through and select your quotations. I've highlighted some, but they may not be the ones that you want to analyse for imagery and feelings and stuff. For example, if I was doing this, my bit of evidence, I'll put evidence I would select in green, by the way, is I would be talking here about how the boats, the Armada, all came to ruin and were on flame, the burning, the destruction there, because that hints at the destruction and the loss that's going to happen later on. I would also use this one, the past shadowing us. But again, pause the video, go through the quotes, pick out the ones you want, and maybe have a guess at the why. Okay, so assuming you've done that, you can see that we've got a little bit of a match-up between the two. Now, if I just put both of them together like that, you'll see that the Armada one doesn't have as many annotations because I haven't gone through that yet. I'm going to go through that now just to help figure out some of the imagery. But that's the sort of thing that you want to see. So both poems clearly annotated. You wouldn't do this much annotation in a real exam, but obviously this is a walkthrough to help get you used to that. In a real exam, you just figure out the who, what, when, where, circle your quotes, and then get started. Okay. Now, because this is a comparison, we need to actually come up with a table, a plan for things to compare. And this is going to be our plan in the background that I've got ready here. But we need to figure out a little bit more of some of the quotes in order to actually come up with that plan first. So if we just go back in and do a few more annotations here, go to red this time. So when it says I was told was believed on, a little I knew was less limited than now, there's a little bit of a sense of naivety there. They're naive, and maybe a sense of innocence. Why? Because they're a child. That we know that this area is when they are a child because of what it tells us a little bit further down. All right, the broken fortresses, the trigs, the paper tissue of galleons, the waterlogged branches of submarines all came to ruin or on flame. So this is what they've created. They've built this. It's been created, but also it's been destroyed. And you've got that sense of loss. He's lost the boat that he's actually created, but it's hinting towards a loss which he's going to have in the future with his mother. Okay, you could talk about the dusk red pond. Perhaps an imagery here of death would be like, and blood would be one thing you could say. I think that's a little bit blunt though, because it's not going to be about his mother, being covered in blood in the hospital later on. But dusk is the end of day. That's the bit I would focus on. And the end of day, and it's hinting towards the end of life later on. Obviously, his mother's not nearly dying there because she's only 23, and that's happening 40 years later. So it's a hint at the future end. I'll put in inverted commas there. Okay. Going a little bit further down, how closely the past shadows us. All right, that's a nice idea because your shadow follows you; it goes with you. And your past also makes you who you are. And that's a nice little phrase to actually, to come up with, because the question's about parent-child relationships, and technically our parents make us who we are. It's their DNA that creates us. You've got that expression, the apple never falls too far from the tree. People are actually a product of their parents and also their environment as well. Okay, and so then we go to the hospital part. So it's almost worth kind of like sectioning this off, because this is kind of like the later part, and this is the bit up here with the past. So all of this is the past, and all of this below that line is the present, when he's losing his mother as an adult. Okay, so he kneels in the hospital beside bed, closing my eyes. He's got that sadness, that grief, that pain, perhaps, and also he's got the memory of the past. Now, he's reaching out to do that and touching her skin, pretending to touch that memory of the past, because it's a happy memory. But the happy memory is in the past, when she was still alive. So he's reminiscing. Make sure I spell it right. And so she's been blown out of reach. That's a nice quotation there as well, because it's the idea of loss and therefore the grief that he feels. And so the smallest whisper of death, it came in quietly and it's taken away. And that childhood memory is sharpened. That's a nice quote as well, because if something's sharpened, it's come into focus. Maybe he appreciates it now. He appreciates what his mother did for him. And also it makes him realise just what he's losing. And so you've got that clear imagery of pain and loss at the end. Okay? So that's taken you through that. Hopefully those are some of the quotes that you picked out. I've not put them all in green, but the some of them I've put in green. The other ones would probably be that one I would do there, and then maybe something about where he actually is, like that. So you can see I've got a quotation spread from all the way through, tracking it. And we now want to come up with a plan. Now, you always want to, I'm just going to resize this a little bit there so it doesn't dominate the screen. You always want to plan out the stuff from the Armada first. Okay, so break that story down into sections. Don't think about linking it to Coat just yet. Break it down into the sections of what Armada is actually doing. So, if you look at the early part of the poem, and I'll change colour here to kind of guide you with it a little bit. So if you look in the early part of the poem, it's about this idea of the retrospective, of looking back. So if we sort of do that bit there as section 1, you can say something like calling it looking back and remembering the childhood memory. And it's a time of innocence. And that he's just playing on that water, and his mother's there helping him, sort of thing, playing by the pond. Okay, so what happens? What issues crop up after that? Well, you've got this idea of things being destroyed, sometimes things are lost and ruined. So the boat is destroyed and ruined. So it can also, more generally be talking about loss, because he's not losing his mother at this point, but it's going to hint towards that. It's kind of foreshadowing what comes a little bit later on. There's also the bit about the mother here, impatient to be going. She's old at 23. So if she's got a child who's playing, next to a pond at 23, then she's a fairly young mother. So did she give up her youth to raise him? At 23, a lot of people are going out with their friends and partying and things like that, and she's there with with her young son by this pond. She's spending time with him, and so you've got that love from a mother to her child. You can put lots of things in there. Okay, so you can see if I just number those areas going back through, that's kind of I've done the wrong colour. There we go. That's kind of like section 2. You've got this bit here about her, her age, etc. You might want to blend those things together. There's not necessarily an exact number you want here, but probably sort of 4, maybe 5 sections going through. I then mentioned something about the section of death here, definitely. I don't think you can get away with that. So the mother dies, on her deathbed, and he reaches out to the past. It's not set what you want to go through there, but you want to be talking about at least something in terms of that. And then at the end, you've got that grief and that pain and that loss that comes through at the end. Now you've got that tracking through the story and the main ideas of what the Armada is about, and even if you adapt them slightly, you want to connect it back to Coat. All right? So, again, you probably want to pause the video now and think about what you would connect back to coat, and then I'll show you in a second what I would do when you've unpaused it. Okay, so if we sort of think about connecting those areas, you might even want to blend a couple of these bits together, you know, not do them as separate points, that's totally fine as well. I think in terms of coat, if I just bring coat back up, which is here, yeah, you can still see that, that's good. So if I just zoom out slightly, there we go. In coat, you've got this idea of the shopping trip at the start and remembering that past. And so that's a clear link back to that bit because they're both looking back to a time from childhood. So you can put something like that with the mother. Here, you've got the idea of the boat being destroyed and ruined and things that are lost. I think coat's actually quite different to that because in coat, it's about the idea of protection. Okay, so you could mention something about protection, maybe from the weather, the world. You could mention the coat itself. It's totally up to you, really. Okay. Now in here, the young mother is giving up her youth, the love of a parent. Well, it doesn't talk about that in coat. It just talks about that protective role that the mother had. The mother is everything to this child. So it's going to be quite similar to the point above. You know, they are everything to that child. So this is what I mean. You might want to maybe even combine these two rows into one paragraph, and that would be totally acceptable. Now, at this point, the death of the mother that's mentioned in the Armada when he's in the hospital and he's reaching out and touching her hand, that's a very clear link back to coat because you can see at the end of coat when it mentions the mortal mother bit down here at the bottom, that's showing that you know that it's highlighting that death and that mortality, because if someone's mortal they will die. So in coat the mother also dies, so the mother kind of may have died, or they're thinking about the mother's death certainly, and they're realizing that kind of mortality, that you know nothing lasts, you know your parents won't be around forever sort of thing. And so then the ending is very, very similar. You've got that pain and that loss and that grief at the end because it mentions that black warm street, our slow progress together, that you know we're all marching towards that same ending. It's a pretty bleak ending. So Armada's maybe a little bit more like grief driven and appreciative. Coat's more about realizing that death comes for us all. So that they're kind of slightly different in that respect. You know, that a coat and a mother can't protect you forever. And so that would be your essay plan. So if I just itch that over here and resize ever so slightly, then I should be able to show that at the same time. Just checking that you guys can still see the sizing of that okay. Yeah, there or thereabouts, I think. Yeah. So you then want to do your write-up. So how do the poems Coat and Armada represent parent-child relationships? I need a question mark on the end there. As normal, your left-hand side will be the sort of commentary on what we're doing. This is just explaining. So your introduction should be placing the story of both poems. So I'll let you have a go at that. I'll fill one in a moment. Probably want to pause the video here. So everything starts with the Armada because that's the new poem. As you can see, we structure it on the left here because you've already written up an answer to Coat. And it tells the story of a child who, and just summarise that and then connect it to the summary of Coat. Okay, if you're back from the pause, then assuming you've done that, so you want to be something like, the Armada tells the story of a child. Well, could we call it a child, or should we say it's an adult actually? They're obviously a child in the early part of the poem, and they're an adult in the later one. So I'm gonna rephrase that actually and just put person who looks back on a time in their childhood with their mother when they're an adult and their mother is dying. Which I don't need that comma there. Whereas Coat shows how an adult looks back to a time in childhood where their mother would always protect them. So we could have something like that for an introduction. You could even add a little sentence on the end. You know, both poems are showing that sort of protective role of parents. That's optional, it's up to you. But you just want to make sure that you've got those who, what, when, where things in there. All right, new paragraph, and you then want to explore this bit here. So all of this, if I just colour code that, all of that bit there is going to help you to do the comment for the Armada. So the Armada begins by looking back on an innocent time in the persona or the author's childhood, whichever you want to call it, when they were naively or youthfully playing by a pond and blah 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 blah, and then you're going to get a quote in. So that's where you probably want to use. I've lost where my notes on the Armada are. Here we go. That's probably where you want to do something like I stretched belly down beside the pond, or the child's Armada, or broken forces of twigs, something like that. Okay, I'll let you do that point. So that's all going to be your comment. Here's your evidence, working in with it. And then you're going to develop that idea. So the development's going to depend on what you do. If you're talking about stretching belly down beside the pond, you're going to talk about this like childhood imagery of them playing. Child's Armada is going to be about that youthful perspective. Broken fortress of twigs is about what they've created, etc. So then you want to develop that with some idea on feelings, imagery, writer, themes, and message, and then you will connect it back to code. So if you want to have a go at that independently, you can do that now and pause the video, and then I'll do an example for you in a second. Okay, so I would have put something like naively playing by a pond and building a child's Armada out of twigs and paper tissue as they lay belly down beside the pond. Now you'll see that I've just kind of dropped those quotes in to retell. It's all kind of evidence really, but I've just sort of formatted it to fit the tense and the grammar of what I'm using. So now I'm going to talk about that idea of sort of childhood perspective and fun and games, and how there's no sort of sense of consequence here. So here the persona has no sense of like there's no sense of harm or danger. And they're just enjoying being a child. And life is quite carefree. So you'll see here that I've kind of blended kind of like feelings and imagery. You could add a little bit about write and message here if you want to, but in any case, that's going to be sort of decent development. You then want to connect it back to code. So that's when you go back to your plan, which is here, and that needs to look back at the shopping trip. So you can say whereas, you could say similarly, I suppose, because it's kind of like a similar idea of looking back. So similarly, Coat also looks back on a happy time in childhood where, and then you just want to connect it back to that initial bit. So you'd probably say something about going out in New York City when it was bitter or something like that. So that's the kind of thing that you would put there. Okay. When you've done that, you want to start a new paragraph and you go to the next row of the table. And so your new paragraph, that will become your new comment. So new paragraph, the Armada then describes how the boat is ruined and the loss, and how this kind of like hints towards that future destruction and pain that they will have as a child, like something that they created is gone. And then you'll talk about the protection of the mother, because the mother is there in both of these. She stood next to the boy whilst he's in the pond, and the mother's also in the coat one as well. Okay, and you want to do that. So at this point, I think you should be spending the majority of this time writing this up yourself, working through this table. So each one, going through your notes. I'm sure your teacher's been writing ideas and bits on the board as well, good language, sort of word banks as well to include. Work your way through all of these, as many as you can. And then when you get to the end, you're going to do the why. So you want to pause the video now, and then I'll carry on with the why, the sort of overall messages at the end. Okay, so let's assume that you've done several more paragraphs now. It then sort of blah blah blah. That needs to be in a different colour. So let's assume that you've done lots of those, and then you come to your ending, your conclusions, your whys, your the Y is the equivalent of the zinger for the poetry, and you want to make sure that you're really clear about it. So overall, what does it show us? The Armada, it focuses on, I mean, this is going to be quite similar to the end here. This could even be like combined with this point here. The Armada is showing us that like death is going to come for them, and that loss and that grief is going to be overwhelming, isn't it? It's going to sort of take everything away from you. So you could say how devastating the loss of a parent is, and how grief, blah 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 blah. Whereas coat shows you that protective idea, that sort of like that barrier that a parent provides will be there for a long time, but eventually that coat will disappear. And so both of these poems are united by the things that nothing lasts forever, that this idea of loss will creep into everybody's life, and that's kind of what you want to be saying in your why for your overall bit. Something about the bond and the pain. I combined both words there. The bond and the pain, the grief, the death, and what that does to you, and how it shapes you, and how it takes away that sort of childhood innocence. Anything like that would be good for the why. Okay, so hopefully you found that decent as a video, and you've now got 2 good essays for evidence for unseen poetry. One for a single answer for coat, and then comparison between coat and Armada. All right, thanks very much.